Ray Santiago's knuckles rapped against the steering wheel in a rhythmic, almost frantic way as the engine of his old van sputtered trying to start. He glanced nervously at the rearview mirror at the yellow blinking lights of the Valley View storage auction on the horizon. He could already feel the weight of the day's decisions pressing on his chest, like a vice tightening around his ribs. With one hand still on the wheel, he fumbled for his wallet in the side pocket of the van door. The crinkled, faded flyer, too many folds and creases from being stuffed in his back pocket for the last few days, was all he had left of a hope he wasn't even sure he believed in anymore. Come on, Ray muttered under his breath, slapping the steering wheel. The van gave one final tired groan before it finally rumbled to life, and he exhaled a small victory in the otherwise uncertain morning. The sun had just begun to set, casting an orange glow that filtered through the cracked windows, illuminating the dust and clutter that filled the inside of the van. It felt like a small, suffocating world of his own. The van's seats were old-torn and smelled faintly of mildew, a reminder that no matter how far he drove or how many new places he tried to visit, there was always something about his life that never changed. His son Carlos was quiet in the back, his small voice too small to fill the empty spaces between them. Ray's gaze flicked to the rear view again, and his fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He knew he was running out of options, running out of time. The past month had been a cascade of setbacks. First, the garage closed down. Then the landlord gave him an ultimatum about the rent, followed by Carlos's asthma flare-ups that drained what little savings they had left. Ray had worked as a mechanic for years, getting by on his hands and grease, but something had changed in the last few months. Work had become harder to find, and the people he once worked for didn't seem to care about a mechanic who was down on his luck. Ray rubbed his face, his skin stubbled rough, worn down by too many sleepless nights. He thought about Carlos, who had spent his childhood in a van instead of a bedroom. That innocent, hopeful smile on his son's face was the thing that kept him going, but even that was beginning to fade as the reality of their life set in. Ray's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Carlos shifting in the back. He glanced in the mirror, seeing his son sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Are we almost there?" Carlos asked, his voice barely audible. Ray forced a smile, doing his best to mask the weariness in his face. "Almost, kiddo. Almost." Carlos didn't say anything else, but Ray saw him start to look out the window at the rows of buildings, garages, and warehouses passing by. Ray knew his son could sense the tension hanging in the air like thick smoke. The auction was his last shot. Ray's stomach tightened as he neared the Valley View storage facility. It was a small, rundown place surrounded by industrial buildings, one of those areas where the cracks in the sidewalk told a story of neglect and forgotten promises. The auctioneer's loudspeaker crackled to life as Ray parked at the edge of the lot. A voice, dry and clipped, began listing off the terms. He barely listened. He was too focused on the $200 in his wallet. $200. That's all he had left. He'd need it for gas food for Carlos's medication. He couldn't risk it on a gamble, but there was no other choice. Ray glanced back at Carlos. His son was already unbuckling his seatbelt, eager to get out. The excitement on his face made Ray's heart ache. This auction, this tiny little thing, was their last shot at survival. Ray had no illusions about winning anything more than a few trinkets. But maybe, just maybe, he could find something hidden, something overlooked by others. There were always stories about people striking gold at these things, and Ray couldn't help but cling to the hope that maybe, just maybe this time, they could too. As he stepped out of the van, Ray hesitated, his feet planted on the cracked pavement. The auctioneer's voice droned on, calling for bids. He glanced at the crowd, mostly men, some women, all of them with notebooks or phones out calculating their next move. The auction was already in full swing, and the first few units had already gone for more than Ray could afford. The weight of the decisions began to sink in. Was this a mistake? Was he about to throw away what little he had left? Ray pushed the thought away. He couldn't afford hesitation. He turned to Carlos, who was already walking toward the main area, his hands in his pockets, and his head held high, as if this were any other day. "Stay close," Ray called out, trying to keep his voice steady. Carlos gave a small nod, his face bright with a mix of excitement and curiosity. Ray watched him for a moment, before his attention was pulled back to the auction. The next unit was announced. It looked like a mix of old furniture and some boxes, nothing too promising, but something about it caught Ray's eye. A small wooden trunk was half hidden behind a broken dresser. Ray could see only a corner, but it was enough to make his heart race. He stepped forward, feeling the familiar tension coil in his gut. The bidding started low, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way. The crowd was already whispering about the contents. Ray looked down at his wallet, and then back at Carlos. The thought of risking everything on this one chance tightened his chest, but the pull was undeniable. He stepped forward, his voice rough with uncertainty. $50. The auctioneer looked up surprised at the quiet bid. The crowd was momentarily silent. Then the auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack, "Sold Unit 34." The words echoed in the lot, and Ray felt a rush of relief mixed with dread. He'd done it. He'd gambled everything they had on this moment. His heart pounded in his chest as the crowd began to disperse, moving on to the next unit. He was left standing there, a little out of place, with nothing more than a small, crumpled receipt and a newfound sense of fear hanging over him. Ray took a deep breath, turning to Carlos, who had already started walking toward the unit. His son was full of life, his excitement palpable, while Ray felt his own legs heavy with the weight of their future. Ray wiped his brow, trying to shake the uncertainty that clung to him like a second skin. They had no choice but to move forward now. As they made their way to Unit 34, the cold evening air seemed to freeze everything around them. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty parking lot as the dim lights flickered above. Ray's mind was a whirlwind, $45 a gamble, an auction. His palms were sweaty and his throat dry. Carlos looked up at him. "What do you think's inside?" Ray forced a smile, trying to push aside the growing panic inside him. "I don't know, son. But we'll find out." The van was parked just a few yards away, its tires cracked and weathered by time. But Ray kept his gaze ahead, moving toward the unit with determination, the key in his hand, his heart beating faster with each step. The wooden door creaked open, and a wave of musty air rushed out. There, hidden behind broken furniture boxes of soggy books and plastic-wrapped garbage, was the small trunk. Ray's fingers brushed against its worn surface, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt the faintest stirrings of hope. Ray knew this could be a mistake, but it could also be their one chance. And right then, it didn't matter what was inside. It only mattered that they had found it. Now it was time to see if this was the moment they'd been waiting for. If you're going to take a gamble, make sure you've got enough left to lose. Ray couldn't shake the words as they echoed in his mind. He stood there staring at the lock on Unit 34, his hand frozen on the key. The trunk so innocuous, yet holding a potential promise that seemed almost too big to be real. He had come here today, a man with little to his name, but now standing before this weathered door, he realized that everything hinged on this moment. Carlos was already crouching by the side of the unit, his small fingers prying at the lockbox that had been left ajar. He wasn't old enough to understand the gravity of the situation, but the anticipation in his face was clear. The boy, ever hopeful, was already picturing the riches they'd find. It made Ray's heart swell with something akin to guilt. Hope was something he could never seem to give up, but in moments like this, it made him feel like he was burdening Carlos with a dream that was bound to disappoint. He swallowed hard and turned the key in the lock, hearing the satisfying click of it giving way. The door creaked as he slowly pulled it open, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The light from the lamps overhead barely illuminated the interior of the unit. Ray peered inside, adjusting his eyes to the dimness. Boxes stacked high, a few broken pieces of furniture, and the smell of mold and dust. Nothing immediately stood out. But then his gaze landed on it. The trunk. It sat there tucked away like a forgotten relic, surrounded by what appeared to be junk. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him, but there it was. A small vintage wooden chest, its corners worn and faded with time, yet somehow preserved, as if someone had left it behind on purpose. Ray's pulse quickened. He walked toward it, careful not to disturb anything else in the unit. His fingers brushed against the smooth wood, tracing its weathered surface. There was a heaviness to the air, a stillness that made him feel like he was trespassing in someone else's past. Was this someone's last possession? Was this their final gamble too? Mom, look. Carlos's voice pierced through his thoughts, and Ray snapped back to reality. His son was crouched over a small pile of old magazines, his face alight with excitement. Ray couldn't help but smile. What did you find? Carlos held up an old Polaroid camera, its body scratched and faded, but still intact. He flipped it open, inspecting the battery compartment. Maybe it works, he said, his tone full of wonder. Ray nodded, ruffling his son's hair. Maybe it does. We'll take it home and see. It wasn't much, but for Carlos, it was enough. Anything really would have been enough. With that distraction settled, Ray returned his attention to the trunk. He kneeled beside it, running his fingers over the rusted clasp, the cold metal, a contrast to the warmth of the air around him. He could almost feel the weight of the decisions that had led him here, decisions made out of necessity, desperation, and maybe a little bit of stubborn hope. He pulled open the latch, careful not to snap it. The lid creaked, revealing the contents hidden inside. Ray exhaled slowly, fighting back the excitement threatening to rise in his chest. There were old jewelry boxes, some tarnished silver spoons, and a few other small trinkets scattered among the shredded bits of paper and broken furniture parts. At first glance, it didn't look like much, but something in Ray's gut told him not to give up just yet. He began sorting through the items, lifting them carefully, inspecting each piece for signs of value. It wasn't a lot, but there was something here that felt significant. As Ray continued to sift through the clutter, a small leather-bound journal caught his eye. It was tucked beneath a pile of damaged books, its edges frayed and worn. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, running his thumb over the cover. There was no name on it, no indication of its contents, but he felt it in his gut. This was important. He flipped it open to the first page. It was filled with elegant looping handwriting. The ink was faded, but the words were legible, as if the writer had poured their thoughts into the pages carefully, deliberately. Ray's brow furrowed as he scanned the words. To whom it may concern, if you're reading this, it's because my worst fears have come true. Vincent has stolen what rightfully belongs to Catherine, and I am afraid my time is running out. Ray's fingers froze on the page. His breath caught in his throat. Catherine. Vincent. The names weren't familiar to him, but they meant something bigger. His mind raced, connecting dots, but the words didn't offer up their secrets easily. He scanned further, his pulse quickening as he read on. If anything happens to me, know that the key to the truth lies within this chest. The legacy of the O'Keefe collection must be preserved, not plundered. I've hidden the pieces where only the right person can find them. Ray snapped the book shut, his heart pounding in his chest. A legacy, a collection. This wasn't just a random storage unit. It was connected to something far bigger. He glanced over at Carlos, who was still inspecting the camera. Ray tried to focus on his son's face, on the innocence and the hope he wore so easily. This was for him. This was why he couldn't give up, why he couldn't turn away from whatever this was. Ray stood up, his head spinning. He needed to find out more. Was this connected to the O'Keefe estate? Who was Catherine? What did Vincent have to do with all of this? And most importantly, what did he have to do with it? Ray's hands clenched around the journal as he carefully placed it back inside the trunk. He locked the trunk shut and turned to Carlos, who was already on his feet, waiting expectantly. "We're not done yet," Ray said softly, a determined fire burning in his chest. "There's more to this, and we're going to figure it out." Carlos's eyes lit up, his excitement bubbling over. "What do you mean?" Dad Ray smiled, the weight of the moment sinking into him fully. "I think we just found something worth more than we imagined." They gathered the remaining items, small artifacts, a few books, and the journal. But Ray couldn't shake the sense that they had barely scratched the surface. There was something more here, something hidden that only time would reveal. He knew they were stepping into a deeper world, now a world that might change everything for them. Ray loaded the items into the van, his mind racing. He had no idea how to proceed, but the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form slowly, almost imperceptibly. He needed to find out who Vincent and Catherine were, what this O'Keefe collection was, and why it had been hidden for so long. Ray looked over at Carlos, his son already lost in the excitement of the camera. He had no idea what his father had just uncovered. But Ray had a feeling that this would be the turning point, the moment their luck changed, whether they were ready for it or not. As the van rumbled to life and they pulled away from the auction site, Ray felt the pull of something greater than just survival. It was the possibility of a future that had been hidden away in that trunk, buried in the past. And for the first time in a long time, Ray felt the faint stirrings of hope. It wasn't just a gamble anymore. It was their chance at a new beginning. Sometimes the most valuable things are hidden under layers of dust and decay. Ray leaned against the worn table in the small corner of his van, the door half open, letting the last traces of daylight filter through the cracked windows. Carlos sat beside him, the excitement from the auction still lingering in his eyes, but Ray could feel the weight of the journal in his hand, heavy with the promise of something unknown, something dangerous. The words from the journal echoed in his mind, unsettling him. He read them again slowly, his eyes tracing the delicate script. "If anything happens to me, know that the key to the truth lies within this chest." The mention of Vincent, Catherine, and the O'Keefe collection stirred something in Ray, a sense of urgency, but also fear. What had he stumbled onto? Who were these people? And what did they want with whatever was hidden away? He had no answers, only questions, but one thing was clear: he couldn't let this go. He looked over at Carlos, who was tinkering with the old Polaroid camera, oblivious to the storm brewing in his father's mind. The boy's small fingers adjusted the lens, a sense of wonder on his face as he peered through the viewfinder. It was the innocence Ray cherished most about him, that unrelenting optimism. But Ray couldn't afford to get lost in the moment. He had to figure out what this all meant for Carlos's sake. They couldn't afford another wrong turn. Ray's gaze fell back to the journal. The name O'Keefe kept circling in his thoughts like a haunting melody. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like the O'Keefe name was more than just a clue, it was a connection. He couldn't ignore the gnawing sensation that his discovery was only the tip of something much bigger, something tied to wealth, history, and potentially a family tragedy. The journal had been hidden for a reason. Whoever left it there didn't want the truth to come to light. Not unless it was in the hands of someone they trusted. And Ray wasn't sure he was that person. The last thing he needed was to attract attention from the wrong people. But he couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when there was so much at stake. Ray took a deep breath and pushed himself up from the table. We're going to need help. Carlos looked up, his face curious. Help from who? Ray wiped his brow, the heat of the van closing in on him. I'm going to reach out to someone who might know about all this. Someone who can tell us what the journal means, what Vincent and Catherine were really up to. He paused. But we have to be careful. This isn't just a treasure hunt, Carlos. There are people who won't want this story to come out. Carlos's eyes widened with excitement, the hint of understanding beginning to form. Like the bad guys in the movies, Ray smiled weakly. Yeah, exactly like that. But I'll make sure you're safe. That's the most important thing. Carlos nodded, though Ray could tell his son wasn't fully grasping the gravity of the situation. That was fine for now. Ray didn't want to burden him with the details, but he did need to find answers, and fast. Ray reached into the van's glove compartment and pulled out a worn phone book. He flipped through the pages, searching for the name that had been haunting him for days. Lena. He had heard rumors of a local historian who had spent years researching Albuquerque's history, especially the old families that had once ruled the art scene. From what Ray had gathered, Lena was an expert on the O'Keefe name. If anyone could help him understand what was going on, it was her. Ray dialed the number, the ringtone echoing in the silence of the van. He tapped his fingers nervously on the dashboard. The phone clicked, and a voice answered. Lena Martinez, she said, her voice smooth, but with an edge that suggested years of dealing with difficult questions. Hi, my name's Ray Santiago. I think I need your help. Ray said, his voice unsteady. There was a slight pause on the other end, then the sound of papers rustling. Go on? Lena said, her tone shifting to something more businesslike. I found something. Ray continued, taking a deep breath. Something connected to the O'Keefe family. A journal old, maybe even from one of their personal collections. It talks about a legacy, a forged will, and a missing art collection. I don't know much about it, but I think I might have something important. Lena didn't say anything at first, but Ray could hear the change in her breathing. Where are you? I can meet you. We need to talk. Ray's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly. I'm at Valley View Storage, just outside the city. I can meet you in an hour if that works. There was another pause before Lena replied. Give me 30 minutes. The line clicked dead, and Ray stared at the phone, his mind racing. This was real. He wasn't just holding some forgotten items anymore. He was holding a key to something that might change everything. But what if it was too late? What if the O'Keefe family or someone else had already covered their tracks? He pushed the thoughts aside. There was no going back now. If he was going to figure out the next steps, it was time to face the people who held the answers. He looked over at Carlos, still occupied with the camera. Carlos, I need you to stay in the van while I go meet someone. Can you do that? Carlos didn't look up, but his voice was small. Are we going to be okay, Dad? Ray nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. Yeah, buddy, we'll be fine. Just keep an eye on the van for me. I won't be long. Carlos's face lit up with a smile that made Ray's heart tighten. Okay, Dad. Ray grabbed the journal, shoving it into his jacket pocket, and took one last look at his son. He didn't want to drag Carlos deeper into this mess, but the truth was, they were already in it. And there was no turning back. As Ray walked toward his truck, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. The weight of the evening ahead hung over him like a storm cloud. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming next would change everything for them, for better or worse. But one thing was certain: this was just the beginning. The road ahead was unclear, but Ray knew he had no choice but to follow it. And somewhere deep inside, despite the uncertainty, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The value of something isn't just in what it is, but in what it can become. Ray pulled up to the old cafe on the edge of town, his mind still spinning from the call with Lena. The wheels of his van crunched over the gravel parking lot as he parked next to an old rusted truck. The cafe was small, run down, the kind of place that never bothered to upgrade its sign or replace the faded paint. But Lena had told him to meet her here, and if there was one thing Ray had learned over the past few days, it was that he couldn't afford to question any of the choices that led him to this moment. He stepped out of the van and stretched his legs, the ache in his back from too many sleepless nights making itself known. As he made his way toward the cafe, he felt a knot in his stomach. This wasn't just about finding some forgotten treasure. This was about connecting dots that had been left untouched for too long. A journal, a missing art collection, a forged will. And then there was Vincent O'Keefe, a name that haunted Ray's thoughts, the last thread that could unravel everything. The bell above the door jingled as Ray stepped into the cafe. It was warm inside, the smell of fresh coffee and something baking mixing in the air. A few regulars sat at the counter, their conversations soft and distant, as if they had all been coming to this spot for years, finding comfort in the familiarity of the worn-down surroundings. Lena sat in the far corner, a mug of coffee in front of her, her eyes scanning a small stack of papers. She looked up as Ray approached, her expression unreadable. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore a denim jacket over a simple shirt, the kind of look that blended in but still gave off an air of purpose. "You came," Lena said, her voice steady as though she had expected him all along. There was no surprise, no sense of urgency in her tone, just quiet confidence. "I said I would," Ray replied, taking a seat across from her. He placed the journal on the table between them, careful not to make too much noise. The weight of it felt heavier in the daylight, like a secret that refused to stay buried. Lena didn't touch it immediately. Instead, she picked up her coffee mug and took a slow sip, watching him from over the rim. Ray wasn't sure what she was waiting for, but it was clear she wasn't in any hurry to dive into the mystery. "Let me guess," Lena said, setting the mug down. "You're wondering who Catherine is and what all this means for you and your son." Ray nodded, his fingers tapping against the edge of the table. "Exactly." Lena's eyes narrowed as if trying to weigh him. "I know a lot about the O'Keefe family. Too much, probably. But it's not a simple story. The O'Keefes had money, art, power, things that didn't come easily. Vincent O'Keefe, he didn't earn it, he took it. And Catherine," she paused, leaning back in her chair. "Catherine was the one who stood in his way." Ray swallowed. "So what happened to her?" Lena looked down at the journal, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages. "She disappeared," she said softly. "But the rumors, those didn't go away. She was the rightful heir to everything, and Vincent made sure that no one would ever know that. He erased her, erased the evidence, but not completely." Ray felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just about stolen art or old debts. It was personal, too. Catherine had been erased, and somehow that erasure was connected to the very things Ray had found: the journal, the key, the old trunk. "This journal," Ray said, his voice faltering slightly. "It's hers, isn't it, Catherine's?" Lena nodded. "Yes, it's a record, a warning. If someone ever found it, they could piece together what happened. They could expose Vincent for what he really is. Ray's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just some forgotten heirloom or lost treasure. This was the key to undoing a great wrong, something that went deeper than stolen art. It was about justice. It was about a family that had been destroyed for the sake of greed. So why didn't Catherine just leave something for someone to find? Ray asked, his voice growing thick with disbelief. Why hide it like this? Lena's eyes softened for a moment, and she leaned forward. Because, Ray, sometimes the truth is too dangerous to be left in the open. There are people, powerful people, who would stop at nothing to keep this hidden. Catherine knew that. She didn't trust anyone, not even her closest friends. That's why she left the journal in a place where only someone who understood the gravity of the situation would find it. Ray's fingers clenched around the edge of the table. And now we've found it. Lena's lips curled into a tight smile. Now you've found it. And you're right, this could be your chance to change everything. But you're not alone in this. There's always someone watching, Ray. Always. He didn't need to ask who she meant. He knew it was Vincent or the people connected to him, and they would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. I'm not backing down, Ray said, his voice firm. I need to know more about this collection, about what happened to Catherine, and about Vincent. How do we find the rest of the pieces? Lena took a deep breath, as if weighing the risks. The O'Keefe estate is still intact. It's been carefully managed, but there are rumors, whispers of a hidden vault that contains everything Catherine left behind. A vault that only someone who knows the family's history could find. But it's guarded, and not just by Vincent. Ray leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Where is it? How do we find it? Lena hesitated. There's a place, she said quietly, almost as if saying the words aloud made them more real. But getting to it won't be easy. There are people who have been watching this family for years, and they'll do whatever it takes to stop you. You'll have to be careful. And quick. Ray's mind raced. This was more than he had expected, more than he had bargained for. But now, with the journal in his possession, with Lena's help, it felt like the only thing he could do was follow through. This was the chance he'd been waiting for, the chance to change everything, for Carlos to give him a future that wasn't defined by struggle and survival. Let's do it, Ray said, his voice steady. Lena nodded a quiet agreement, passing between them. She slid the journal across the table to him. Then let's start with the vault. Ray took the journal in his hands again, his grip tightening around the leather cover. This wasn't just a gamble anymore. It was a fight for justice, for a future that didn't belong to him alone. And it was just the beginning. The past doesn't stay buried. It waits for the right moment to surface. Ray's fingers trembled as he carefully placed the journal on the passenger seat of his van. The words he had read earlier, the ones about Vincent and Catherine, the legacy, the will, stirred something deep within him. This wasn't just about finding treasure or solving a mystery anymore. It was about justice. Catherine's justice. And it was a justice that had been buried for too long. Lena's warnings echoed in his mind. There are people, powerful people, who would stop at nothing to keep this hidden. She was right, but Ray couldn't afford to back down now. His son Carlos was depending on him. If he was going to give his son a better life, he had to see this through. But first he needed answers. Lena had given him a lead, something about a vault, hidden somewhere within the O'Keefe estate. A vault that contained everything Catherine had left behind, a legacy that Vincent had tried to erase. Ray didn't know where the vault was, but he knew he had to find it. And soon, he started the engine, the old van rumbling to life. The night had fallen around him, a blanket of darkness that only made the weight of his task heavier. He glanced at the rearview mirror, seeing Carlos still sitting in the back seat, his head resting against the window, eyes half closed. Ray sighed, the exhaustion of the day catching up with him. It had been a long time since he'd felt this much pressure, but the stakes had never been higher. The key to unraveling the O'Keefe family's secrets was within his grasp, and there was no turning back. He had to do this not just for himself, but for Carlos. The van's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the empty streets as Ray drove toward the city's outskirts. His mind kept drifting back to the journal. There was so much he didn't understand. The names, the legacy, the vault, he had only scratched the surface, and yet it felt like the weight of the past was pushing down on him. He wasn't ready for this, not really, but there was no time to hesitate now. As Ray neared the old district where the O'Keefe estate was rumored to be, he noticed something strange. There was a black car following him. It wasn't close, but it was keeping pace, turning when he turned, stopping when he stopped. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Not tonight, he muttered under his breath. He wasn't going to let someone intimidate him into backing down. Not now. Ray made a sharp left turn, the tires screeching against the pavement. The car behind him followed, its headlights flickering with each turn. Ray's pulse quickened. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. But Ray couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. He had to get to the O'Keefe estate, to the vault, before anyone else did. He sped up, glancing at the rearview mirror. The car was still there, its presence haunting the darkened road. Ray's mind raced. Who could it be? Vincent's men, someone else tied to the O'Keefe estate. Whoever it was, they weren't there to help him. As Ray approached a sharp curve in the road, he made another quick decision. He swerved to the side, parking the van behind an old abandoned building. His heart hammered in his chest as he sat still, watching the black car drive past him, oblivious to his sudden detour. He waited for a moment, making sure the car didn't circle back. When he was certain the coast was clear, he exhaled, his tension easing. But the unease remained. He knew he was being watched. It was only a matter of time before someone figured out what he was after. And when they did, he had to be ready. Ray turned the key in the ignition again, the engine rumbling as he pulled out of the alleyway and continued on his path. He had no idea what to expect when he got to the O'Keefe estate, but he knew one thing for sure: it was no longer just about the journal or the artifacts. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter what it cost him. As the van rolled up the long, winding driveway to the estate, Ray's stomach twisted. The mansion loomed in the distance, a crumbling relic of a forgotten time. It was hard to imagine that something so grand had once been a symbol of wealth and power. Now it was just another decaying reminder of the people who had once lived there. Ray parked the van near the front gate and stepped out, the cool night air filling his lungs. He had been here before, years ago, when he was just a kid running errands for a neighbor who had once worked for the O'Keefe family. But that was a lifetime ago. Back then, he hadn't known what was really happening behind the closed doors of this estate. Now everything was different. He walked toward the large iron gate, his footsteps muffled by the thick grass. The estate was silent, as though it had been abandoned for years. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. Ray's pulse quickened. He knew he was close. The gate creaked as he pushed it open, the rusted hinges protesting with every movement. He stepped into the yard, the overgrown grass brushing against his legs. The mansion stood before him like a ghost, its windows dark and empty, its stone walls cracked and weathered by time. Ray had always heard stories about the O'Keefe family, but he had never truly understood the weight of their history. Not until now. Ray took a deep breath and walked up the front steps, his hand tightening around the journal in his pocket. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt it deep inside. There was something hidden here, something that had been waiting for him. As he reached the front door, he hesitated, his fingers hovering over the handle. The door was ajar, as though someone had left it that way for him. Ray pushed it open slowly, the old wood groaning under his touch. Inside the mansion was dark, its walls lined with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. It was a place forgotten by time, abandoned in favor of newer, shinier things. But Ray could sense the weight of its history, the lives that had been lived here, the secrets that had been buried. The air was thick with dust, and Ray felt a shiver run down his spine. He stepped inside, moving carefully through the abandoned halls. The house felt like a maze, its rooms leading nowhere. But there was something about it, something that made Ray feel like he was getting closer to the truth. He moved deeper into the house toward the staircase at the far end of the hallway. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the floorboards creaked under his weight, and then in the distance he heard it. A sound soft, barely audible. It was the sound of footsteps. Ray's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and Ray's mind raced. Who else could be here? And what did they know about the vault? He turned toward the sound, the journal still clutched tightly in his hand, his mind focused on the task ahead. There was no turning back now. Sometimes the right people come into your life when you least expect it. Ray stood frozen in the dark hallway, his breath catching in his throat. The footsteps grew louder, each one heavier, closer to where he stood, hidden in the shadows. His fingers instinctively clenched around the journal, the cold leather feeling like an anchor in his hand. He hadn't expected anyone else to be here, not tonight, not after all the trouble he'd gone through to get this far. His mind raced. Who was it? Was it someone sent by Vincent, or worse, someone who already knew what Ray was after and was trying to stop him before he could uncover the truth? The footsteps stopped just outside the hallway, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. Ray's heart thudded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still, his eyes scanning the darkened space ahead of him. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now, not when he was so close. And then, just as suddenly as the footsteps had started, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, her silhouette framed by the faint light filtering through the broken windows. She was tall, her dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her movements were deliberate, confident. She stepped into the dim light, and Ray's breath caught in his throat. She looked familiar. "Ray Santiago," she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of caution. "I've been waiting for you." Ray blinked, disoriented for a moment. "You've been waiting for me?" The woman nodded, stepping closer. "Yes, I'm Lena Martinez." Her eyes studied him with a mixture of curiosity and something else, perhaps caution, or maybe something deeper like recognition. Ray's confusion only deepened. "Lena Martinez," he repeated, his mind trying to place her. You're the historian, the one I spoke to about the O'Keefe estate." Lena's lips quirked into a small, almost amused smile. "That's right. I figured it was only a matter of time before you made your way here." She glanced around the hallway, her eyes taking in the decaying walls and the faint smell of must and abandonment that filled the air. "You've got courage, I'll give you that. Most people wouldn't dare step foot in here after dark." Ray didn't respond immediately, still processing everything she had just said. Lena had been waiting for him. She knew what he was after, and yet here she was, standing in front of him, seemingly unaffected by the tension that had gripped him ever since he first uncovered the journal. "I didn't expect you to be here, though." Ray finally said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his mind. "I thought I was the only one looking for this." He held up the journal, the leather-bound pages heavy with secrets that had yet to be uncovered. Lena didn't seem surprised. "You're not the only one looking, Ray. You're just the one who stumbled across the right clues at the right time." She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I've been studying the O'Keefe family for years. This estate, their history, it's all connected. And I knew eventually someone would figure it out. I just didn't expect it to be you." Ray frowned, feeling both a sense of relief and unease at her words. "What do you mean someone would figure it out?" Lena's gaze softened as if she understood the weight of the question. "You don't know, do you?" she said quietly. "The O'Keefe family's legacy wasn't just about art or money. It was about power control and the secrets that they kept hidden from everyone. The vault you're looking for, it holds more than just valuable paintings. It holds the truth. And it's a truth that, if exposed, could destroy everything Vincent has worked for." Ray felt a chill run down his spine. That's why he's hiding it. He doesn't want anyone to know. Lena nodded. "Exactly. Vincent's whole life has been about maintaining control over the O'Keefe estate, and that includes the family's hidden history. The vault, it's the key to everything. It's where Catherine hid the records, the documents that prove Vincent's corruption." Ray's thoughts raced. But why didn't Catherine just leave it all out in the open? Why hide it away? Lena's expression darkened. Because, Ray, sometimes the truth is too dangerous to expose. And Catherine understood that better than anyone. She knew Vincent would stop at nothing to erase her from history, just like he tried to erase the legacy she was meant to inherit. Ray looked down at the journal in his hands, the weight of its significance settling on his shoulders. Catherine's legacy. Vincent's betrayal. It was all tied together in a way Ray couldn't yet fully grasp. But he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about finding a vault anymore. It was about bringing Catherine's story to light and holding Vincent accountable for everything he had done. "I need to find this vault," Ray said, his voice firm. "And I need to do it before Vincent or anyone else can stop me." Lena studied him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "I'll help you. But you need to understand, this isn't going to be easy. The estate is guarded both by the law and by people loyal to Vincent. There's a reason no one's ever found the vault. And even if you do find it, you'll have to be prepared for what you might uncover." Ray nodded, his determination growing. "I've already come this far. I won't stop now." Lena gave him a small smile. "That's what I like to hear. But we have to be careful. This isn't just about the vault. It's about making sure we get the truth out without putting ourselves in even more danger." Ray felt a sense of resolve settle over him. Lena was right. He couldn't afford to rush into this blindly. He had already made one mistake by getting too close to the O'Keefe estate, and he wasn't about to make another one. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't back down. "So what's the next step?" Ray asked, his voice steady. Lena's eyes gleamed with purpose. "The first thing we need to do is locate the vault. And to do that, we'll need to find the key. I've been tracking down leads for years, and I think I've finally uncovered the place where it's hidden. But we have to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that someone will catch on." Ray nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. The vault, the key, the truth. It was all within reach, but it wasn't going to come easily. They had to act fast, and they had to be smart. Lena glanced at him, her expression serious. "Are you ready for this, Ray? Because once we start, there's no going back." Ray's heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve never wavered. "I'm ready." The two of them stood in the darkened hallway of the O'Keefe estate, their fates intertwined by the secrets of a family that had long since been buried. The road ahead would be dangerous, But Ray knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stop now. For Carlos, for Catherine, for the truth. He was in this until the end. The law is a weapon, but it can also be a shield. Ray's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he drove through the dark streets, his mind whirling with the details of what Lena had just told him. The O'Keefe estate, Vincent's empire, the vault, all of it was tied together in ways Ray couldn't yet fully understand. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had to keep moving, had to keep the momentum going before Vincent or anyone else figured out what they were after. Lena's words lingered in his mind. The law could be both a weapon and a shield, and right now it felt more like the former than the latter. If they were going to find the vault and expose the truth, they needed to be smart, careful. The stakes were too high for mistakes. Ray had done some research of his own since meeting Lena. The O'Keefe family, from what he could tell, was built on a foundation of power, wealth, and secrecy. Catherine had been a casualty of that world, erased not just from history, but from the lives of those who had been left behind. If he found the vault, the truth about Vincent's corruption could bring the entire house of cards crashing down. But with the power Vincent wielded, Ray couldn't afford to let his guard down. He pulled the van into the parking lot of a small, inconspicuous office building, one that looked like it had seen better days. The dimly lit sign above the door read, "Shannon and Associates Estate Law." It was a law firm, nothing flashy, but it was exactly what Ray needed. The building was quiet at this hour, but Ray wasn't concerned about that. Inside, there was someone who could help him. He had met David Shannon a week earlier, a lawyer with a reputation for handling complex estate disputes. He'd come highly recommended by a friend of a friend. And although Ray didn't trust many people these days, David seemed like someone who could be trusted to keep things quiet. At least he hoped so. As he stepped out of the van, Ray checked the time. It was just past 9, but he had already been in this game long enough to know that time wasn't on his side. He had to move quickly. There was too much at risk now, too many unanswered questions. Inside the office, the air was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The reception desk was empty, but the door to the back office was cracked open. Ray knocked softly before stepping inside. David was seated at his desk, reading over a stack of papers. He didn't look up immediately, but when Ray cleared his throat, he finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're early," David said, his voice neutral. Ray smiled wryly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not here to waste time. We need to talk." David leaned back in his chair, studying Ray for a moment. His office was filled with law books, files, and framed diplomas, everything you'd expect from a seasoned lawyer. But there was something about the way he carried himself, something a little too calm for Ray's liking. "What's going on?" David asked. "I thought we were meeting in the morning." Ray took a deep breath, his mind still racing. He hadn't planned on this, hadn't intended to bring David into this so soon. But he knew now that he needed help. He couldn't do it alone, not with the O'Keefe estate looming over him. "I need information," Ray said. "About the O'Keefe estate, the family, their history, and about a vault." David raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything for a long moment. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You've got a lot of questions for someone who isn't a client of mine. Why don't you start by telling me what you're really after?" Ray hesitated, unsure how much he should reveal. But after a beat, he decided to trust David. There wasn't time to play games anymore. "I'm looking for a vault that belongs to the O'Keefe family. It's supposed to hold the key to their entire legacy, documents, records, things that Vincent's been hiding. I'm not just after some stolen art or valuables. I'm after the truth. The stuff that Vincent's been covering up for years." David didn't flinch. He simply sat there silent for a long moment, as if contemplating Ray's words. When he spoke, his tone was low, almost cautious. "You don't know what you're walking into," David said softly. "I've worked with the O'Keefe family before, and I can tell you there are things buried in that estate that go far beyond money. Secrets that could ruin people. And Vincent isn't someone you can just confront without consequences." Ray's chest tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was another thing entirely. "I don't care about the consequences. If it means exposing the truth, I'll deal with whatever comes." David studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "What makes you think you're the one who can get to the vault?" Ray met his gaze, his voice steady. "Because I have the journal. I have the proof that Vincent is hiding something, and I'm not backing down." For the first time, David's expression softened just slightly. "You're either very brave or very foolish. But if you're serious about this, you'll need more than just a lawyer. You'll need someone who knows the ins and outs of that estate, someone who's been in Vincent's inner circle." Ray raised an eyebrow. "And who might that be?" David leaned back in his chair, the wheels turning in his mind. "I can give you a name, but it's going to come at a cost. I'm not saying you can't do this without me, but you'll need the right people on your side." Ray's patience was wearing thin, but he knew David was right. He needed someone who could help him navigate the dangerous waters of the O'Keefe estate, someone with insider knowledge. "Give me the name, Ray," said his voice firm. David hesitated, but finally reached for a piece of paper on his desk and scribbled down a name. Tessa Caldwell. She used to work for the O'Keefe family assistant archivist, whatever you want to call it. If there's anyone who knows the estate and what's hidden, it's her. But be careful. She's not exactly someone who can be trusted without strings attached. And if Vincent finds out you're talking to her, it's over. Ray took the paper, his mind already running through the possibilities. This was a lead one step closer to finding the truth, and maybe even a way to expose Vincent's lies. He stood up, his resolve hardening. "Thanks, David. I'll take it from here." David stood as well, his eyes watching Ray carefully. "Be careful, Ray. This isn't just a legal battle. This is war." Ray nodded, the weight of the warning hanging in the air. As he walked out of the office, he felt the first true stirrings of fear. He wasn't just exposing corruption anymore. He was stepping into a war that could cost him everything. But he wasn't turning back now. For Carlos, for Catherine, for the truth. He had no choice but to keep going. Sometimes the cost of truth is too high. Ray couldn't remember the last time he had been so tense. The chill in the air felt like it was seeping into his bones as he leaned against the van, eyes darting across the dim parking lot. The day had been long, but the real work had only just begun. He had driven to meet Tessa Caldwell, the former O'Keefe assistant, who, as David had warned, was not someone he could trust easily. Tessa had agreed to meet him, but something in her voice during their brief phone call had told Ray that her cooperation wouldn't come without complications. And now, as he stood in the shadows of the parking lot waiting for her to arrive, he could feel the weight of those complications pressing down on him. The minutes stretched longer than they should have, and the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, gnawed at him. He had learned over the past few days that people like Vincent O'Keefe didn't just let things go. The stakes were high. If he found the vault exposed, the secrets hidden inside, there would be no turning back. It wasn't just a family legacy at risk. It was power. It was control. And people like Vincent didn't relinquish control without a fight. Ray glanced at his watch. He had promised Lena he would move quickly, but he couldn't afford to rush into anything now. Not when everything he had worked for so far could be undone in a moment. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. When he had been reckless before he had risked not just his own life, but Carlos's as well. He couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. The sound of a car pulling into the lot snapped Ray out of his thoughts. He straightened up watching as a black sedan rolled to a stop in front of the entrance. The engine cut off and the driver's side door opened slowly. Out stepped a woman in a long coat, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She moved with purpose, but there was a certain guardedness in her stride, something Ray knew all too well from his own experience. Tessa Ray called out, taking a step forward. She paused, her eyes locking onto him as she sized him up. She looked different than he had expected, dressed sharply with an air of quiet confidence. But there was a weariness behind her eyes, something that told him she had seen too much of the O'Keefe family's secrets to remain unscathed. "Yes," she replied, her voice low and cautious. "Ray Santiago." I assume Ray nodded. "I'm glad you agreed to meet. I need your help." Tessa's lips curled into a tight, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't know the half of it," she muttered under her breath, then sighed, glancing around the empty lot. She seemed to relax just a little. "Let's talk inside." Ray followed her as she led him into the building, a small old office that smelled faintly of stale coffee and ink. The faint hum of a refrigerator could be heard in the back corner, but other than that, the room was silent. Tessa took a seat behind a cluttered desk, motioning for Ray to sit in the chair opposite her. As he sat down, Ray felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was it. Tessa was the key to everything. She was the insider who knew the O'Keefe estate better than anyone else. She could tell him where the vault was, what it held, and most importantly, how to get it open. "I'm assuming you know why I'm here?" Ray said, keeping his voice steady, his eyes fixed on her. Tessa didn't answer immediately. She just watched him, her fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the desk as she seemed to weigh her options. Finally, she spoke. "Why do you think I can help you?" She asked, her voice suddenly hard, almost cold. "What makes you think I care about the O'Keefe family's dirty laundry after everything that happened?" Ray's throat tightened. He had prepared for this, but hearing the bitterness in her voice still stung. "I know you were there at the estate when everything went down. You saw what Vincent did. And I know you're not the type to just walk away from the truth when it's right in front of you." Tessa's gaze flickered for a moment, a brief flash of something guilt before she masked it again. She leaned forward, folding her hands in front of her. "I'm not here to play hero Ray. What happened to Catherine, what Vincent did, those are things I can't change. I helped hide the truth because I had to. I didn't have a choice." Ray felt the anger rising in him, but he swallowed it down. "You do now," he said, his voice low. "You have a chance to make things right. Help me find the vault. Help me bring Vincent to justice." Tessa leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "And what's in it for me, Ray? What's my stake in all of this?" Ray hesitated, the truth sitting heavy on his tongue. "What's your stake? What's your stake in being complicit in Vincent's lies, in hiding a family's legacy for your own survival? Do you really want to let Vincent keep destroying everything he touched? Because that's what will happen if we don't stop him." The silence stretched between them, Tessa's gaze unwavering as she studied him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "I've spent years hiding from him, but I don't want to hide anymore. I'm done living in fear." Ray's heart skipped a beat. He had said the right thing. She was close, he could feel it. She wasn't going to turn away now. "All right," she said, her voice resolute. "I'll help you. But you need to understand something, Ray. If you want the truth about Vincent, you need to be ready for what you'll find. There's no going back once we open that door." Ray nodded, his mind already running through the next steps. He knew the danger. but it didn't matter. He couldn't turn back now, not when Carlos was counting on him, not when the truth was within reach. "Tell me what I need to do," Ray said, his voice steady. Tessa stood up and walked over to the file cabinet in the corner of the room. She pulled open a drawer and rifled through it for a moment before producing a yellowed envelope. She placed it on the desk in front of him, her fingers brushing against the paper as she slid it toward him. "Inside this envelope is the map to the vault," she said, her eyes meeting his. "It's hidden in a place no one would expect. But I can't promise it'll be easy to get to. The O'Keefe estate is more than just a house, it's a fortress, and there are people watching." Ray took the envelope, his fingers trembling as he slid it open. The map inside was old, the edges frayed with time, but the markings were clear: an old estate, a secret location, a vault hidden from the world. "I'll go after it," Ray said, standing up, "and I'll be ready for whatever comes." Tessa nodded, her expression unreadable. "Just be careful, Ray. This isn't just about the vault anymore. This is about surviving long enough to get out with the truth." Ray tucked the map into his jacket pocket, his mind focused. There was no turning back now. The vault was in his sights, and the truth was waiting. He had a choice: keep fighting for it, or let the world of lies win. And he wasn't about to let that happen. The truth doesn't always come in a single piece, but in fragments that form a whole. Ray sat in the driver's seat of the van, the engine idling quietly, as the faint hum of the night air filled the cabin. The city was quiet, too quiet for his taste. A sense of urgency had been gnawing at him ever since Tessa had handed him the map. She had given him a direction, a path, but the weight of her warnings lingered in his mind. There was no turning back now. Ray wasn't one to take risks without thinking them through, but this was different. The moment he'd laid his hands on that journal, his life had shifted. No longer was he just trying to survive, he was trying to bring something to light, something hidden in the shadows of the O'Keefe estate. Catherine's legacy was in his hands now, and whatever he found would change everything. It had to. He glanced at the map again, studying the faint markings. The vault was hidden within the O'Keefe family estate, deep inside a place no one would expect. It wasn't a simple task to get to it. There were secrets within secrets, and everything Ray had learned told him one thing: Vincent O'Keefe had buried the truth deep, and he was willing to kill to keep it there. Ray's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the van's window. He looked up to see Lena standing outside, her face half lit by the faint streetlight. She didn't speak right away, just gave him a nod before slipping into the passenger seat without waiting for an invitation. "We ready?" Lena asked, her voice low. Ray nodded, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "As ready as I'll ever be." The map in his pocket felt heavier now, like a weight he couldn't escape. The closer he got to the estate, the more the tension inside him seemed to build. There was something waiting for him there, something he couldn't name, but he could feel it pressing against him like a storm about to break. "You're sure about this?" Lena asked, glancing over at him. "Once we go in, there's no turning back. The O'Keefe family, Vincent, they'll know. They'll come after us." "I know," Ray said, his voice firm, "but I'm not turning back. Not when I've come this far. Not when Carlos is counting on me." Lena didn't respond right away, but Ray could see the calculation in her eyes. She understood what was at stake. They both did. The only difference was that Lena had been living with the O'Keefe family's secrets for years. She knew how dangerous it was to dig too deep. The drive to the estate felt longer than it should have. Ray's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one a thread of the puzzle that had been unraveling since the moment he'd walked into that storage unit. The O'Keefe family's history was tied to so much more than wealth. It was about power, manipulation, and control. Catherine had been erased from the story, but she had left a trail. And now Ray was following it. As they turned onto the long, winding road that led to the estate, the mansion began to come into view, its towering structure barely visible in the dark night. The estate was a ghost of what it had once been, the walls crumbling and the windows darkened, but there was still an eerie presence about it. Ray could feel it in his gut. They were close. "This is it," Lena said quietly, her voice filled with something close to awe or fear. Ray wasn't sure which. "The vault's on the other side of the estate, but getting there won't be easy. We need to be careful." Ray parked the van behind a row of trees just out of sight of the main house. The darkness felt suffocating, and as he stepped out, the cold night air hit him like a slap. He adjusted his jacket, taking a deep breath. Lena led the way toward the estate, her footsteps silent on the grass. She moved with the ease of someone who had walked these grounds before. Ray followed her closely, every sense on high alert. The trees around them loomed like silent sentinels, and the mansion ahead felt like a looming presence, watchful, waiting. They reached the back of the house, where a service entrance lay hidden behind a large set of stone columns. It had been years since anyone had used this way into the estate, but Ray could feel that Lena knew it well. She led him to a door that had been weathered by time, its paint chipped and cracked. Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small set of keys, each one labeled with numbers. She selected one and slid it into the lock, her fingers moving quickly and efficiently. The door clicked open with a quiet sound, and they stepped inside. Ray's eyes adjusted to the dim interior, the smell of dust and decay filling the air. The hallway was long lined with old portraits and faded tapestries that told the story of a family long past its prime. The house was a relic, just like the secrets it held within its walls. "Where to?" Ray whispered, his eyes scanning the darkened hallway. Lena didn't answer right away. She seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed ahead, as if she were remembering something from years ago. "This way," she said finally, her voice almost distant. She led him down a narrow staircase, the steps creaking under their weight. They descended deeper into the house, the air growing colder, the sense of foreboding heavier. Ray's breath came out in small clouds as they reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement, or what was left of it, was a series of small rooms and storage areas. But one room stood out, tucked away at the far end. It was sealed off, the door bolted shut with a heavy lock. "This is it," Lena said, stopping in front of the door. "This is where the vault is hidden. It's behind this wall." Ray stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The map had led him here. But now that he was standing in front of the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had come so far, but what awaited them on the other side of this door? Lena pulled a small crowbar from her bag and slid it into the gap between the door and the frame. She applied pressure, and the lock groaned before finally giving way. Ray's pulse quickened as she stepped aside, allowing him to push the door open. Inside, the room was dim, its walls lined with old wooden shelves and filing cabinets. But in the center of the room was something far more significant, a massive iron door sealed tight with strange markings etched into the surface. Ray's breath caught in his throat. The vault. This was it. Lena stepped forward, her hand resting on the cold metal of the door. "This is it," she said again, more to herself than to Ray. "The O'Keefe family's legacy. The truth." Ray's hand hovered over the lock. It was old, but it didn't look like something that could be easily opened. "How do we get in?" Lena's eyes darkened as she looked at him. "We have to be careful. If we force it open, there's a chance we'll trigger something that will alert Vincent. And if that happens, we'll be out of time." Ray nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had come this far. They couldn't afford to fail now. Lena turned toward him. We need to find the key, and I know where it is. When the truth is exposed, there is no going back. Ray could feel the weight of those words pressing down on him as he stood in front of the massive iron door. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the old building, the faintest rustling of the wind outside the basement's cracked window. The door loomed before him, a physical manifestation of everything he had fought for: the journal, the secrets of the O'Keefe estate, and most of all, the truth about Vincent. He had come so far, uncovered so much, but this was the moment that would decide everything. The vault door, with its ancient lock and strange markings, was the last obstacle between him and the truth. Lena was standing next to him, her eyes fixed on the door, her expression unreadable. She had said she knew where the key was, but that didn't make Ray feel any more secure. Everything about this place felt wrong, the shadows that seemed to creep deeper the longer they stayed, the way the air grew colder the closer they got to the vault. He could feel the weight of years of secrets pressing in on him, and the closer he got, the more certain he became that whatever lay beyond that door would change everything. It would either set them free or destroy them completely. What do we do now? Ray asked, his voice hoarse, as he tore his gaze from the door to meet Lena's eyes. Lena shifted her gaze, flickering back to the vault. We need the key, she repeated. I told you I knew where it was. Ray frowned, his mind racing. Where Lena hesitated, her fingers brushing against the old journal in Ray's jacket pocket. It's in a place no one would think to look, she said, her voice low, almost as if she were reliving something painful. I thought it was lost for good, but now I remember. She stepped toward the far wall, her fingers running lightly over the dusty shelves, as though searching for something she had once known well. Her eyes flitted over the room, as if the key might materialize in front of them. After a moment, she stopped at a corner and knelt, lifting a dusty floorboard. Ray's heart raced as he watched her work. What is it? What's underneath? Lena's hand trembled slightly as she pulled out a small, ornate box, its surface carved with intricate designs. She turned to Ray, her face pale in the dim light. The key was hidden here, right under our noses this whole time. Ray swallowed, unsure whether to feel relieved or unnerved by the discovery. He had expected something more complicated, more dangerous. This simple box tucked away beneath the floorboards felt too easy, too simple. But he knew better than to question it. Lena opened the box, slowly revealing a small bronze key resting inside, glinting in the dim light. The key was old, worn, its edges smooth from years of handling. There was a sense of finality in the air now. This was it. Here it is, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper as she handed the key to Ray. This will open the vault. It's the last part of the puzzle. Ray took the key from her, his fingers brushing against hers. The weight of it was almost unbearable. This was the key to everything: the O'Keefe family's history, the hidden vault, the truth about Vincent's corruption, and the missing legacy of Catherine. He could feel the power of it, the significance of what was about to happen. Now what? Ray asked, his voice thick with anticipation. Lena's eyes were shadowed with doubt, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Now we open it. But you have to know something, Ray. Once that vault is open, we can't put it back. There's no going back. Once the truth is out, it will change everything. There are people who will stop at nothing to make sure that doesn't happen. Ray nodded, the reality of her words sinking in. He had known the risks, but now they felt real. The truth wasn't something he could control. It was a force of its own, and once unleashed, there was no telling what would happen. But Ray knew one thing: he had to see this through. He couldn't back down now, not when they were so close. He turned toward the vault door, his hand tightening around the key as he walked toward it. His steps were steady, but his heart was racing. He didn't know what to expect, but he had come this far, and he couldn't let fear stop him now. Lena stepped beside him, her eyes fixed on the vault. "Do you really know what you're about to uncover?" she asked quietly, her voice a mix of caution and curiosity. Ray's gaze never left the lock on the door. "I'm not sure I do, but I can't stop now." He slid the key into the lock, feeling the cool metal against his fingers. The moment he turned the key, the vault door gave a soft, groaning sound as it unlocked. Ray's pulse quickened, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, as it slowly revealed the contents within. The room inside was dim, illuminated only by the faint light from the hallway. The air smelled stale, as though the room had been untouched for years. But as Ray stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old documents, paintings, and sculptures, things he hadn't expected to see. But in the center of the room, standing like a sentinel in the middle of the dust and cobwebs, was an old wooden chest, much like the one Ray had found in the storage unit. Lena stepped forward, her face a mixture of awe and fear. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the legacy of the O'Keefe family. It's all here, everything." Ray took a tentative step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He was standing in the very place that could shatter Vincent's carefully constructed empire. The documents, the paintings they held, the secrets of a corrupt family. Secrets that would change everything. Ray walked toward the chest, his mind racing with what he might find inside. He reached out his hands, trembling, and slowly opened the lid. Inside the chest was filled with old papers and discolored maps, each one marked with names and dates that meant nothing to him. But then beneath it all, he found something more. An old letter, yellowed with age. Ray picked it up, his fingers brushing against the fragile paper. As he read the words, the room seemed to fade away. The letter was from Catherine. It was a final message, a confession written before her disappearance. The words were chilling. They revealed everything: the corruption of Vincent, the betrayal of the O'Keefe family, and Catherine's plans to expose it all. The truth was there in black and white. Ray looked up at Lena, his heart pounding. "This is it. This is the truth." Lena's face was pale, her eyes wide with realization. "This changes everything, Ray." Ray's mind was reeling, but one thing was certain: they had uncovered the truth. The question now was what they would do with it, and how far they were willing to go to expose it. When the truth is exposed, there is no going back. Ray held the letter in his hands, his fingers trembling as he read the words over and over. Each line, each sentence confirmed the worst of his suspicions. The O'Keefe family wasn't just wealthy, it was rotten to its core. Catherine's final words, written in secrecy and desperation, painted a damning picture of Vincent's manipulations and deceit. He had used his power to control the family's legacy, and Catherine had been the only one who had stood in his way. She had tried to expose him, but she had been silenced before she could finish. The letter was a confession, a desperate plea to anyone who might find it, a warning to those who might stumble upon the truth buried deep within the estate. And Ray had found it. He had found the key to unlocking the family's darkest secrets, and now he was standing in the very place where those secrets had been hidden. Lena stood beside him, her expression unreadable as she took in the letter. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, the weight of them pressing down on their shoulders. She had known Catherine, but not like this. The woman in the letter was different, more vulnerable, more desperate. "This changes everything," Lena whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Vincent's been hiding this all along, and now it's all here. The truth." Ray nodded, his mind racing. The letter wasn't just about Catherine's confession. It was about what it meant for him and Carlos. What it meant for the people who had been wronged by the O'Keefe family's corruption. The legacy that Vincent had tried so hard to erase wasn't just about money or power. It was about the people who had been destroyed along the way. And Ray couldn't let that go. "We need to get this out," Ray said, his voice firm. "We can't let Vincent bury it. We can't let him get away with what he's done." Lena glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the shelves filled with documents, the remnants of a family's past. "But how, Ray? How do we expose him? This isn't just a story anymore. It's a battle. A battle that could cost us everything." Ray's pulse quickened, the weight of her words sinking in. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but now that they had the truth in their hands, the stakes were higher than ever. Vincent wouldn't let this go without a fight, and neither would the people who had helped him cover up his crimes. "We take it to the authorities," Ray said, his voice steady. "We take everything we found, the letter, the documents, the proof, and we let them handle it. They'll have to investigate. They'll have to expose him." Lena shook her head. "You don't understand, Ray. Vincent has connections everywhere. He's tied into the system. The law might not help us. If anything, it could make things worse." Ray's stomach twisted as he absorbed her words. He had hoped for a straightforward solution, but nothing about this was simple. He knew she was right. Vincent's influence reached far beyond the O'Keefe estate. He had corrupted everything he touched. But that didn't mean they had to give up. It meant they had to be smarter, more careful. "We'll go public," Ray said, his mind clearing. "We'll take this to the press. They can't cover it up if the whole world is watching." Lena's eyes widened. "That's dangerous, Ray. You're talking about putting everything at risk. You and Carlos will be targets. We all will." Ray didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. "I'm not letting Vincent win. He's ruined enough lives. It's time someone stopped him." Lena looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. She knew what this meant. She knew the risks. But there was something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just determination. It was the resolve to see this through, no matter what it cost him. "Okay," she said softly. "But we need to be careful. If we do this, there's no going back. Once Vincent knows we have the proof, he won't hesitate to come after us." Ray nodded, the weight of her words settling in. But he couldn't stop now. He had come too far. The truth had been buried for too long, and now it was time to bring it to light. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket. "We'll do it together," he said, looking at Lena. "We'll make sure Vincent can't get away with this." Lena didn't reply right away, but Ray could see the decision in her eyes. She was in, and that made all the difference. He wasn't alone in this fight. They had the truth, and they had each other. That was enough. Together, they turned toward the door, the weight of what lay ahead heavy on their shoulders. But Ray wasn't afraid. He had made it this far, and nothing would stop him now. Not Vincent, not the law, not the people who would do anything to keep the truth buried. They had the power now, the power to change everything. Ray stepped forward, the first steps of their journey into the unknown, into a world where the truth would finally come to light. They weren't just fighting for the O'Keefe family's legacy anymore. They were fighting for justice, for the truth, for everything that had been lost. And nothing would stop them from seeing it through. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Ray felt a sense of purpose. The battle had begun, and he was ready to fight for the future. A new chapter doesn't erase the past. It gives you the chance to rewrite it. Ray stood at the edge of the O'Keefe estate, the cold wind whipping around him, biting at his skin. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would change. Behind him, Lena was still inside the van, her eyes on the door to the mansion. Ray's heart was heavy with the weight of everything they had uncovered, but there was a spark of something in his chest too, something that had been buried for too long. Hope. He had never believed in fairy tales, never thought that the past could be rewritten. But here he was standing on the precipice of something bigger than himself, bigger than his family's struggle. Catherine's legacy was waiting to be reclaimed, and Vincent O'Keefe's carefully constructed empire of lies was about to come crashing down. He looked at the mansion, its looming structure barely visible in the dim light shrouded in the shadows of the past. A once great estate, now a hollow shell of its former glory. The door in front of him had been opened once before, and Ray had made a promise to himself that this time nothing would close it again. "Are you ready?" Lena's voice broke through his thoughts. Ray turned to see her standing just behind him, the tension in her shoulders clear. She had been by his side through all of this, helping him navigate the secrets of the O'Keefe family, but this moment was different. This was the point of no return. "Yeah," he said, the word heavy in his chest. "I'm ready." Lena nodded, her expression unreadable, and walked toward the mansion with a purpose. Ray followed his footsteps, quickening as they approached the grand entrance. It wasn't the same as the first time he had come here, unsure of the danger that lay within, unsure of the weight of the secrets buried in this place. Now every step felt calculated, driven by something stronger than fear, by the need to expose the truth. The door creaked open as Lena pushed it, the familiar groan of old wood filling the silence. Ray stepped inside, feeling the oppressive darkness of the estate settle around him. But this time he wasn't walking in blind. He knew what he was here for. He wasn't here to hide or cower in the shadows. He was here to take back what had been stolen, Catherine's story, the O'Keefe legacy, and the future that had been robbed from so many. They moved through the hallways quickly, their footsteps muted by the thick carpet. The air was stale with neglect, but Ray barely noticed. All he could focus on was the vault, the final piece of the puzzle that would bring everything into the light. They reached the door that had been hidden from the world for so long, its iron surface looming before them like a silent sentinel. Ray's hand shook as he took the key from his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. The journal had led them here. The map, the years of work. It had all led to this point. He inserted the key into the lock, twisting it with a sense of finality. The door clicked open with a soft sound, and Ray's heart raced in his chest. They were on the verge of something monumental, but the truth had a price. It always did. And he knew the moment they opened that vault, the moment they exposed what had been hidden for so long, there would be no turning back. Ray pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room inside was vast, the stone walls lined with shelves that held more than just objects. It was a tomb of memories, a vault not just of wealth, but of a family's fractured history. And there in the center of the room stood the chest that had started it all. Lena stepped forward first, her hands trembling as she approached the chest. "This is it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is everything." Ray stood just behind her, his gaze fixed on the chest. It looked ordinary enough, but he knew better. He could feel the weight of it, the power that lay beneath the surface. The chest had been hidden here for years, buried under layers of secrecy and lies. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of everything that had been kept in the dark. A symbol of Catherine's legacy. Lena opened the chest slowly, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. Ray's breath caught in his throat as the contents were revealed. There were stacks of papers old and yellowed with age. Letters, documents, photographs, all the things that had been erased, swept under the rug to protect Vincent's empire. But this time nothing would stay hidden. Ray stepped forward, his eyes scanning the documents. "This is it," he whispered. "This is everything Catherine wanted to expose." Lena nodded, her expression softening for a brief moment. She knew someone had to find it. Someone had to bring it to light. She never wanted the family's legacy to be used as a weapon. Ray picked up a letter, its edges frayed with time. It was Catherine's handwriting, unmistakable. He read it quickly, his heart pounding, as he absorbed the weight of her final message. "To whom it may concern, I write this in secret. For I know that if Vincent finds out, I will be silenced, as I have been before. The truth must come to light. My brother has stolen the O'Keefe family's legacy for his own erasing all that was meant to be. I have left proof of what he has done, and I ask that whoever reads this expose him for the monster he truly is. The vault holds the documents, the art, the evidence that can bring him down." Ray's breath hitched as he read the final line. The truth. The vault. He looked up at Lena. She knew. She knew this would be the only way. Lena stepped closer, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She wasn't wrong. This is how we make sure Vincent can't escape his past. Ray clenched his fists, the weight of their task settling in. We take this to the authorities. We expose him for everything he's done. Lena nodded slowly. But you're sure about this? Once we hand this over, there's no turning back. Vincent will retaliate, and anyone who gets in his way will be swept under the rug. Ray glanced at the chest again, the magnitude of their discovery sinking in. The weight of Catherine's words hung over him, urging him to act, to take action, before it was too late. "I've already come this far," Ray said, his voice firm. "I won't let Vincent bury the truth any longer. Not for Catherine. Not for anyone." Lena stood silently for a moment, her gaze shifting between Ray and the chest. "All right," she said quietly. "Then let's finish this." Ray nodded, and together they gathered the documents and photographs, carefully placing them into a bag. The truth was no longer hidden. It was ready to be shared with the world. Ray felt the tension in his chest ease slightly as they prepared to leave the estate. This was the moment he had been working for, the moment when everything changed. But the path ahead was uncertain. They had uncovered the truth, but Vincent wasn't going to let them get away with it. As they stepped back into the night, the cool air pressing against his skin, Ray knew the battle was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right side of history. And no matter the cost, he would see it through to the end. The educational lesson learned from this story is that uncovering the truth, no matter how difficult or dangerous it may be, is a powerful act of justice. Sometimes the past holds painful secrets, but it's never too late to stand up for what's right, no matter the challenges. The story reminds us that doing the right thing, even when it feels overwhelming, can lead to a more honest and fulfilling future. It teaches that the pursuit of truth, although often difficult, is worth the effort and can bring healing and change.